So in this video, we need to talk about a statewide ban on the purchase and possession of certain magazines, and currently the attempts by a state to remove a permanent injunction which prevented that law from going into effect. So let's break down what is happening. Now, really quick before we jump into this video, I want to mention two things. First, a lot of you guys ask me, where can you get channel merch? Channel merch is available. We have a variety of shirts. One of them is actually on sale right now. So if you're interested in picking up this shirt and some of the other ones, some patches and things that we have, you can check that out using the links down below. And then also, I want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is Kershaw Knives. Kershaw makes some of the best knives available on the market if you're just looking for a quality EDC knife. If you just want to get a quality EDC knife, check out Kershaw Knives, and if you order using the code ARM40, you can get 40% off of your order. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we need to do an update and talk about the huge win that we got against a statewide ban on magazines, and then also a state's attempt to put in place a purchase permit, essentially to acquire any future firearms. Oregon Measure 114, which put in place a statewide permit to purchase scheme, and then also a magazine ban, was ruled unconstitutional and struck down in its entirety. The state court judge there in that case issued a permanent injunction against Measure 114. The state of Oregon is currently attempting to remove that permanent injunction through the state's appeals process. Now, the case we're going to be talking about and focusing on in this video is called Arnold versus Kotek. The Arnold case is a state lawsuit filed with the help of, I believe, GOA and then also the Second Amendment Foundation. This case challenges Oregon Measure 114 as a violation of the Oregon state constitution. So again, it's not technically a federal lawsuit. It's not applying the Second Amendment at large. Instead, this is more focused to the state of Oregon and their specific articles. Now, let me explain generally what Oregon Measure 114 did. Oregon Measure 114 will first require that anyone purchasing a firearm must obtain a permit to purchase. Now, to obtain that permit to purchase, the resident there would need to go through a safety training course, go through a background check, get fingerprinted, show a valid ID, and then also pay fees. And then after all of that, well, then you would be granted a permit and you could acquire future firearms. However, Measure 114 again did not stop with just the permit process. The second significant thing that the measure did, which is impacting a lot of people, is an outright ban on the sale, purchase, and transfer and possession of any magazines that hold more than 10 rounds after the effective date of the measure. Now, in the Arnold state lawsuit, you had a Harney County Circuit Court Judge, Robert Rocchio, and Robert Rocchio was the judge reviewing this case, and originally on review, he granted a TRO and then also a preliminary injunction, which effectively prevented Measure 114 from ever even actually going into effect, which was huge. One of the really good things about preliminary injunctions and TROs is it's a mechanism to stop any of these laws from actually going into effect, because once they go into effect, it's really hard to remove them. So that's why a lot of times in these cases you will see preliminary injunctions which are filed, because you want to stop these from ever being enforced. Now, I know sometimes there's conversation about, well, you shouldn't do preliminary injunctions, you should just move it towards a motion for summary judgment to get a final decision, get a final merits decision. But even that's not a great strategy, because almost if you just bypass the preliminary injunction, you are conceding to the state and you're letting the state put in place their new gun control law. So it's kind of one of those double-edged swords, and it's one of those give and takes. Now, in this specific case, even after the preliminary injunction, will then the case move towards a final merits decision. And on a final merits review of the case, Judge Rocchio issued his final decision in the case, striking down the entire law, finding that it was invalid. But of course, the story does not end there. Oregon as a state then appealed the decision up to the State Court of Appeals. They then asked the Oregon Court of Appeals to place a stay on that permanent injunction that Judge Rocchio issued. But ultimately what ended up happening is both Rocchio and also the Court of Appeals in Oregon denied that granting of the stay. So they did not stay the permanent injunction, and technically the permanent injunction is still in place. Now, the state of Oregon also asked in the alternative, if they didn't get that stay request, that the case here, that the review here on appeal should be expedited. There should be an expedited hearing and then also an expedited briefing schedule to essentially move this through the appeals process as fast as possible. So now the state of Oregon has filed their opening brief to the appellate court, and also now the plaintiffs in this case have submitted their response to what is happening in this appeal. Now, in the plaintiff's response on appeal, they stated that Article 1, Section 27 provides that the people shall have the right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state, but the military shall be kept in strict subordination to the civil power. They go on to state that rather than forthrightly erasing this right by amendment, a slim majority of voters disinformed by well-funded out-of-state anti-firearms advocates passed ballot measure 114 to supposedly combat a litany of overstated, undersupported, and sensationalized public safety aims. They go on to say on appeal that defendants seek to upend generations of Oregon law and culture and turn constitutional interpretation on its head. Defendants have eagerly awaited this opportunity. Indeed, despite not being the subject of this appeal, defendants' brief lays bare their goal of declaring semi-automatic firearms the most common self-defense firearms unprotected, thereby requiring Oregon's residents to defend themselves and their state with antiques and calling into question the validity of those rights. So also what they're referencing there is in the brief in the lower court also, the state of Oregon was hinting at maybe a broad-reaching and sweeping semi-automatic rifle ban, and also the interest in doing that as well. So they're kind of referencing that also about how drastic Oregon is becoming, and also what the broad-reaching implications of this case will be if ultimately the plaintiffs lose. Now, again, it's important to note that since this is a state challenge under the Oregon State Constitution, there's a different standard for a state court to determine the constitutionality of a state law and whether it violates the state constitution. Under this standard, it appears that Oregon applies kind of a two-phase test. Under phase 1, there is a determination of whether or not the Article 1, Section 27 actually applies. Now, under that first phase, Oregon argues that Article 1, Section 27 does not apply at all, since they believe that these magazines that hold more than 10 rounds are not arms and are not protected at all as arms. To combat this argument by the state of Oregon, they point out that the Supreme Court has identified multiple times in Bruin, Heller, and other cases that modern arms are also protected, and arms include all modern instruments that facilitate armed self-defense, including magazines. Now, the second phase of this test is almost looking at the public's interest and kind of doing a balancing of the, claimed purpose of this measure and what impact it will have on the constitutional right and what impact it would have on the purchase and possession of arms and what public benefit it really serves. Of course, Oregon, when they passed Measure 114, when it was voted on, they argued that the measure was necessary for the public's best interest to essentially stop shootings. However, when the trial court actually reviewed that evidence and the data, the expert testimony, and all evidence that the state of Oregon could put forward for this public interest, they found that really only in the history of Oregon, I believe, there were 2 incidents that would justify this public interest or to try to stop it for that public interest. And, it was 2 out of the 179 nationwide. So for just the 2 rare incidences and this whole public interest, the state of Oregon decided to completely ban magazines. And the argument here is that this restriction cannot be justified by the public's interest, especially one that the data doesn't even show is really a concern. Now, also later on in the brief, they address the permit process and the constitutionality of requiring a permit to have just the access to firearms to even be able to purchase and acquire future, firearms in this whole permit process. And there's a lot of concern also about how the state of Oregon was going to implement this, and they didn't even have a process in place. And really what it would have led to during that December is if it was allowed to go into effect, because they didn't have a process in place, essentially no one would have even been able to even acquire firearms. So this is one of those really interesting cases, and it will be interesting to see how these arguments proceed forward at the, appellate court level. I've been in contact with the attorney that's leading this case, and I know he appreciates all of you guys, all the viewers, and all the support that you guys have been showing to this lawsuit. Now, I also highly recommend that you go support the plaintiffs in this case. He gave me a link, and I will link that down below where you can donate to the lawsuit and support the plaintiffs in this action. So again, that will be down below. So for everyone interested in what's going on with Oregon and their statewide magazine ban and their permit process, that's where it currently stands. And now we're waiting for the appeals to play out and the expedited hearing to take place. But if anything else changes, I will let you guys know. So if you guys like this video and you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm, and it signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of 2A news. But as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And don't forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.